about the book. I would say about 20 years ago, a friend of mine sent me a clipping from one of the New York papers. It was a story about a young boy in Italy. And there was a picture of this young boy next to a horse. This young boy in Italy who gets sick and needs a transplant and can't find one in Italy, and ultimately gets a bone marrow transplant from a rabbi in Brooklyn. And really the most touching thing about the story was that the boy survives, and the people in the town are so just so thankful. They decide to have the rabbi come to the town to celebrate him. So this was an actual story that I read about. And I think over the years, that story kept coming back to me. And it basically said to me, you've got to write something along these lines, because all the sort of elements of this story are elements that I so much value and love in this world. And ultimately, I did write a book with these, the bones of this story in my mind. And the elements that I'm talking about are my love for almost anything and everything for Italy and Italian culture. My sort of interest when races, different ethnicities sort of come together and intersect. The fact that I myself had a bone marrow transplant, so I about 25 years ago now, was a patient and had a bone marrow transplant, which is why this friend of mine sent me the clipping from the newspaper. My experience, of course, as a doctor is also an element in the story. And lastly, over the years, I felt like I could also get in a Holocaust theme. I could weave that into the story, even though it's not present. So all of these say a lot about me. And anybody who reads this book will see me in all of these different elements. And I just feel like we can touch on all of them. So I come from a mixed family. My father was a Hungarian Jew, a Holocaust survivor. My mother was born in Brooklyn, and her father was an Italian man from Naples, Catholic Italian man from Naples. And I was very close to my grandfather growing up. Poppy Jim, we called him. And he was a very larger than life kind of figure, vivacious. He loved to eat. He loved to tease me. He had a little bit of a temper, but he was just a wonderful person that I really was very drawn to growing up. He used to make his own homemade raviolis, and while we were doing that, he would test me on my timetables. He had this garden, this wonderful garden, and I would assist him in the garden. Anyway, he was a figure that I was always drawn to. I would eventually study Italian in college. I would eventually take a year of college and spend it in Rome. I eventually married an Italian woman, an American-Italian woman, Italian-American woman, Daniela Vitali. And as it happened, most of her jobs were with Italian fashion companies. So it was great because not for the clothing, but for the fact that I could tag along whenever she went to Italy, and I could explore places that I've never been to. So Italy was always and remains a very important part of my life. So that's one element in the book that, drew me to this story. Um, I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is kind of a big melting pot. Anybody who knows Bay Ridge, I mean, there's just so many different ethnicities, so many different religions, and I kind of have come to sort of, I think about it, and I feel like it's sort of like some of these moments and places in history where different races got along better than they do today in general. And I'm thinking of Spain in the 15th century. I'm thinking of Holland in the 17th century. I'm thinking of the Balkans before the craziness started. And I've always loved that about Bay Ridge and always admired those points in history. And anybody who reads the book will know that in my book, the rabbi who is ultimately the donor for the transplant meets very regularly with his friend, a Catholic priest, and his friend, the imam from the local mosque, at the Bridge Diner, which is an actual thing, but especially because the rabbi is very, very determined to build bridges between the different communities. So that's an important element in the book, an important element that in my life. So I said that I had a bone marrow transplant, and indeed, very shortly after my residency in dermatology, I got sick, and I had this very strange and rare condition called paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, and I would need a transplant. The good thing in my case was that I had three sisters, and one of them turned out to be a perfect match. So I did not have to go to a registry, as in the case with many people, and in the case of my story. But it clearly had a huge impact on my life, thinking about how sort of tenuous life can be, and also just having that experience of being a patient, of being sort of on the other side of medicine, which I think has been a good experience for a doctor to sort of know what it's like. The other thing that you might have noticed in reading the book is that I'm a big fan of nurses. And when I had my transplant, I would say that the nurses were almost more important to my, well-being as the doctors. And in my book, Nina is probably my favorite. The nurse that takes care of Luca is one of my favorite characters in the book. So that you can kind of get a glimpse of that. As a doctor, okay, another element in the book. One is privy to sort of many beautiful things, many intricacies of the human body. And I really wanted to capture that in this book. I'm just going to read a small passage or two just to get a sense. And this is actually what gives the book its title. When the doctor is looking at Luca's marrow smear, the smear of his bone marrow, under the microscope. He peered through the lens and adjusted the focus until the blood cells began to materialize, red and blue and shades in between, different shapes and sizes representing distinct lineages and stages of development. In all these years, it never failed to amaze him, this magnificent dappled sea of bone marrow, ever regenerating and replenishing itself in an ongoing cycle that made life possible. red cells that carried oxygen to the tissues, white cells that fought off infection, and platelets that made the blood clot. So it's just an example that I kind of wanted to get this sense of the body and some of the kind of amazing things that happen. I talk also in the book about the homing of the marrow cells. So when you have a bone marrow transplant, the marrow cells, the stem cells from the marrow, go through the veins, and they must circulate through the body and eventually find their way to the marrow, where they will eventually proliferate and start getting the donor to produce marrow cells. That process is called homing, and it's I also write a little bit about that. I won't read that section, but it's kind of an incredible thing. And what's also incredible is to think about some of the things that are going on in the body, and how they sometimes parallel things that are going on outside the body. So we talked about the dappled sea, all these different colors of the cells. And I think it's a really nice metaphor for the diversity that's within and around us. And within the body, there's the cells that are working together. We have organisms, bacteria that are inside of us that coexist with us. The tremendous genetic variability. I mean, if anybody goes to ancestry.com and looks at their ancestry, you'd be amazed at all the different kinds of ethnicities that found their way into your genome. Homing is also something that goes on in the body, where the cells have to get to the place that they need to be. But homing also occurs in this book outside the body. Luca is constantly in search of home, of where he fits in. He lives with his so-called grandparents, who turn out to be not his real grandparents, and ultimately gets a transplant from a rabbi because he shares Jewish genes with this rabbi, even though he's supposedly a Catholic boy. And so there is a kind of identity crisis when he finds out that his father was a Jewish person fleeing the Nazis. And so one of the questions that the book asks is where is home? How does one form an identity? Is it a genetic thing, or can it be formed on the basis of environmental factors? Ultimately, Luca feels more at home with Nina, his nurse, who takes care of him and is unrelated to him, rather than the only surviving relative he has and finds in Prague, who he doesn't feel so close to, at least at the moment he met this person. So homing in the body, homing outside the body. Where is home? A big theme in this book. And then lastly is the Holocaust. So I mentioned my father was born in Debrecen. And as a teenager, he was very lucky because in 1944, when most of the Hungarian Jews went to Auschwitz, he was very lucky to go to a work camp in Austria with his parents, and ultimately survived and eventually made his way back to Hungary. But clearly this had a huge impact on my father, and he passed that, down to his children this terrible sort of history and crisis that he had to go through as a young boy. And so I wanted to weave that in to the book. And I did so with this notion of Luca having some kind of Jewish genes, and how could that happen? And so I looked at the Holocaust in Italy, reading the books of Primo Levi and some histories on the subject. And it really is a fascinating and not so often studied aspect of the Holocaust. Italy, as a country that was allied to Germany at the time, and who instituted racial laws, very similar to those that were introduced in Germany. Somehow, the majority of Jews in Italy, both those who were Italian Jews and those foreigners who were coming into Italy to try to get away from the Nazis, the majority of those Jews survived the war. About 85% of Jews survived the war. The actual inverse happened in Hungary, where 85% of the Jews were obliterated in the war. And the question is, how that was possible. Of course, the numbers, by the way, in Italy are very small compared to the numbers of Jews in Hungary. But I found that an interesting thing. And as it turns out, there were a lot of ways that the people and the church, not all of the church, there's a big controversy about the Pope, but that the church really helped in sort of hiding a lot of the Jews that were in Italy at the time. Not that there weren't bad players, and that appears in my book as well. But it's a pretty interesting part of history that I found fascinating. And so I think that's where I will stop talking. But I just wanted to say that, all of these elements that I mentioned are there in the book, and really tell a lot about me as a person, because it's all of the things that are very meaningful to me. So with that, I think I'll call back Wendy, if that's okay. And I'm ready if anybody wants to ask questions or, yeah.
It is certainly a pleasure to be called back. Thank you very much for filling in some of the background. I actually, as I said before, I found the book really enthralling, and some of the points that you brought up fascinating. So one of the questions that has come into me is regarding the DNA. And there's been a lot that's been written recently, or the past few years, about hidden Jews, and how people who never realized, like Luca, that he had Jewish ancestry. It was fascinating that you used that science. What could you, in your research, what have you discovered about some of the things that are going on, finding these people that were hidden, whether it was something that was done during the early on years, or something that was done during the Second World War, people that don't know that they're Jewish, and suddenly they go for something even as a transfusion and find out that they've got.
Right. I actually don't know a lot about that. I do remember though, so again, I don't know a lot about that. And that wasn't really part of my research on this. The only thing I would mention is that there was a great book, I thought. I can't remember the author, but the name of the book is We Are the Lucky Ones, about this Polish family. Do you know that? It's an incredible, if you don't know it, you should read it. It's about a Polish family that gets all separated during the Holocaust, and eventually come together. They are the lucky ones at the end. But it's written by like the granddaughter of one of them, who never knew that she had this whole Jewish history. I don't think she was raised Jewish. Never knew she had these Jewish relatives. I'm almost sure that's the way it is. And just somebody lets on something, and she begins a research project, and she comes up with all this incredible story. So I'm sure this happens. This is not a unique thing. I did not study that though.
Thank you. Another one of the characters that you really speak about is Luca and his grandfather.
Yes.
Have a very interesting relationship.
Yes.
His grandfather is walking around with a world of guilt.
Yes.
On his shoulders, and I think, and one of the questions, do you feel that there was true culpability in his grandfather taking this child? There's a question, for those, I'm sure most of you who've read the book know that this question is, did he turn in the parents that were in the woods? Was he responsible for their death? Or was this just something that happened to happen, and he took this of Luca's father and brought him up?
I kind of wanted to make it a little ambiguous and not so clear cut. So the thing that he really feels guilty about is when he noticed the refugees on the property. He hears the refugees. He is supposed to then alert the partisans that here's this group, and we need some help. He doesn't do that, and so there is something he feels guilty about. He does not turn the people in. He definitely does not do that. But the other thing he feels guilty about is that when he agrees to take the baby, because the refugee group did not want to have this baby who was making all sorts of noises with them as they make their way to Switzerland. He agrees to take the baby. He also feels guilty because when there is a massacre of these refugees that he is not responsible for, except for the fact that he didn't get help that may have averted this or may not have. But he also feels a little bit happy because now he has the baby and he doesn't have to give the baby back. He and his wife especially, have been unable to have a baby on their own. And so he claims that this baby is from an orphanage and doesn't tell his wife where he got the baby. So there's also a secret and a lie involved. So he has a lot of guilt. I don't think he is not directly responsible for the killing of these people, but he feels he's a little bit, and he also feels guilty for that. He was somewhat happy that he now has the baby free and clear, and so he can't forgive himself.
I think there's also the ambiguity about the paper that he left with the.
Yes. I feel like that piece of paper that would have identified the child. Yes, that's true. He loses in the snow, and there is a question of whether he drops it or it just blew away in the wind. I don't think he knows. I think it's a long time ago, and I think it probably just fell and he didn't retrieve it.
One other question going to Luca now. Did he, after he came to the United States, and he did establish a relationship with a rabbi, however, did he embrace his Jewish roots? or was he able to find a home within that community?
I I didn't I don't think of him as I feel like the rabbi keeps talking about Luca as a sort of muddle. That he is this mixture. He has these. He still has. So his mother would have been Italian. His mother would have been Catholic. The father was a Jew. And so I think he sort of. I think what is important to him is not necessarily the religion, but the history, but the fact that the rabbi saved his life and he becomes close to the family. I don't know whether I don't necessarily see him as in full on and embracing Judaism. No.
And one of the questions that came up was about the rabbi.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the rabbi saved Luca's life by the
Mhm.
transplant, but on some levels, did Luca not save the rabbi's spiritual life
Yeah.
when he gave that transplant?
Yeah. No. And this is I think one of the most incredible things about, you know, the sort of gift of giving. On the one hand, the rabbi is giving of himself, and in a way, doing it. It's not a completely safe, 100% safe procedure. There was a story of the principal in New Jersey, like a year or so ago, of a school in New Jersey who dies. Beloved principal of one of the schools in New Jersey who dies giving a bone marrow transplant. I think it was a year or two ago that it was in the news. So it's not a risk-free procedure that he does this, but he's in a funk, maybe even verging on a depression, and he does see this as some sort of a way out of it, something that he can do actively to help somebody in need. He sometimes has this notion that a lot of what he's doing is more passive and listening and consoling, and so this gives him an active kind of thing where he could save a life, and I love that notion that the Talmudic notion that he who saves a single life saves the world, and I do believe that the rabbi was healed in a way through the giving of this marrow, through this gift of marrow, and I love that idea. It's the basis, giving, charity, whatever, the basis of all religions, but this is really like on a different level, and doing so for a stranger. He doesn't know who he's, it's just an incredible thing.
And his wife was not particularly supportive. In fact,
at the beginning, but she does come through in the end. So yes, yes, she is very much involved in doing these bone marrow drives, bone marrow testing drives for her community. And that's the way it is a lot of times, that we do things for our community. And she's also a little bit, her personality is that she likes to be sort of directing things at home. And so I think she's also upset that he goes outside of her jurisdiction by doing this without telling her. But she ultimately embraces and she ultimately welcomes Luca into her home. So it does all work out in the end.
Very well written, I must say. Thank you so much again for joining us this evening. I do look forward to continuing my journey of reading your wonderful books. And I'm going to now turn the floor over to our wonderful Vice President of Programming for Sisterhood, Nadine, if you could, there you go. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. David, thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was so interesting hearing you share your personal story and how it became the plot for your book. And I enjoyed reading it, and I look forward to reading your next book. As Wendy said, make sure everybody look for this. And the next book is "And the Bridge is Love."
Yes.
So we look forward to reading that. Thank you, Elise and Wendy, for making these author talks happen. If you check the JCC site, there's one almost every month coming up. And our Sisterhood is very busy, Temple Beth Shalom. Tomorrow night, we have Cantor Barnoy presenting Hot Off the Press, the current events in Israel, online news sources. On Monday, on 11/8 at 8 p.m., Rabbi Rosenthal will have a Zoom class on Jewish legal perspectives on adoption, perspective of adoption. On Tuesday, 11/9, a Zoom presentation. Wendy will lead us in Rosh Chodesh, cultivating the uniqueness of women's leadership. It's a monthly program. Next Monday, Monday the 15th, in person and Zoom, the journey of the authentic self, learning about and understanding the transgender community. And our next event after that in November, Gratitude and Miracles Family Challah Bake on Sunday, 11/21, 12:30 in the afternoon. Bring your kids. It's in partnership with the religious school. We'll be making a menorah and turkey, and it will be COVID safe. So thanks very much for a wonderful evening. And I'm glad that you could all join us.
Thank you, everybody. It's always a pleasure to work with Temple Beth Shalom. And David, I was getting personal texts from people who have my cell phone just saying thank you. They wish they could meet you. So God willing, in the future, we can do a program in person when it's safe for everybody. So to everybody out there, I wish you good health, continued good health. I hope you all stay healthy. And to David, just may you go from success to success in both your dermatology, your teaching, and your in all of three, and your writing endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.